Hey, everybody, thanks for tuning into Baxy's Musical Podcast. If you like what you hear, be sure to subscribe to it, like it, share it with everyone you know. Please clog the internet with it. That would be very much appreciated. And if you could leave a big fat review, that would be fantastic. Also, make sure you check out Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook for regular updates on what's coming up next on future episodes. Today, we're brought to you by Metro Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram of Chicopee. Visit Metro's state-of-the-art dealership right next to BJ's and Big Y on Memorial Drive, or visit metrojeep.com and drive home in your new Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram today. So let's get into our conversation about Lollapalooza with record executive John Rubeli on Baxy's Musical Podcast.
It's Baxy's Musical Podcast.
Last year, there were more than 800 music festivals in the United States. 800. Now, some of those festivals were enormous multi-day annual events. Others were scheduled in smaller venues and were over in just a matter of hours. Some have been enormously successful, and others have been unmitigated disasters. However, you would be very hard-pressed to name a single music festival that has had more relevance and recognition over the course of time than Lollapalooza. Founded by Perry Farrell in the early 1990s as a means of scheduling a farewell tour for his band Jane's Addiction, Lollapalooza quickly became arguably the most important music event since Woodstock or Live Aid. But unlike those festivals, Lollapalooza initially focused on alternative music, swirling through a musical underground and giving people their very first taste of some of the most important bands over the last 40 years, and then making a tour out of it. This was a festival whose timing and foresight were so profoundly ahead of their time that it seems almost unimaginable that it was Lollapalooza that gave bands like Pearl Jam, Rage Against the Machine, Green Day, and Nine Inch Nails their very first taste of national exposure. Over the years, Lollapalooza would grow, fall apart, return, and then once again reclaim its place as one of the most important music festivals in the world, expanding to cities around the globe while still dipping into a diverse set of musical genres, creating an air of inclusion through music, art, and socially conscious involvement, all of which started pre-internet and pre-social media, and it continues to be groundbreaking even today. A brand new 3-part documentary series about Lollapalooza's history has been released on Paramount+. The name of the series is Lolla, the story of Lollapalooza. The series features not only Perry Farrell and its organizers, but also pre-internet footage of Lollapalooza in its infancy. It also focuses on its challenges, its struggles, and its amazing resurrection. Among those heavily featured in the series is my friend John Rubeli. From 1992 to 1995, John was responsible for booking talent on Lollapalooza's second stage. It was John Rubeli that booked up-and-coming bands like Green Day, Tool, The Flaming Lips, Beck, and Coolio. In February of 2022, I interviewed John Rubeli on this podcast. John and I have known each other for close to 37 years. We were both students together at Marquette University in the mid-'80s and even worked together at the campus radio station. John's amazing career has gone from being a kid in Phoenix, Arizona, to booking some of the most amazing shows of the Student Union, to Lollapalooza, and then becoming the vice president of A&R at Atlantic Records. John has gone on to start his own independent record labels, Chop Shop Records, and then Gray Market Records, which he's run for the last 8 years. He's also served as a board member for several art galleries throughout Los Angeles and is very much a part of the city's growing artistic community. And I know this guy. That episode from 2 years ago is still one of the most popular interviews that I've done. And so it is a real thrill and a pleasure to welcome back my friend, John Rubeli, on Baxy's Musical Podcast. So I'm watching the documentary last week with my wife, and every time you come on, I'm like, hey, I know that guy. And, there he is again. And it was just so cool to see you be a part of this and to get credit for your contributions and to see the role that you played in literally exposing like an entire generation to some of the most important music of the last 30 years. It's clearly a source of pride for you and also Perry, but everybody that was involved in it seems to have this general vibe that this is something very, very special that you were all a part of.
Well, I met you in the middle of being a part of something magical and special. I mean,
Yeah.
we didn't have the internet. We didn't have distractions that we whiled away too many hours with. We had music, we had record stores, and we had each other. And so to me, it's like I never really went to summer camp and I didn't really make those lifelong friendships until I was on the road with Lollapalooza. So to be in college alongside you and the friends that we had, there's just something about the support that you feel, the enthusiasm that you share, the mixtapes that we passed around, and the shows that we ended up at. And so in many ways, when you're sort of etched with that from the beginning, these experiences and these friends and these passions that we developed, I mean, here we are 40 years later, whatever it is, 30 years later, and we're just talking about exciting music, exciting times. And so to be able to pass along in a way, kind of like a mixtape to another generation, the enthusiasm that we all lived through when we weren't buried into our phones all the time. It was really a lot of fun and a lot of joy for me to go back and relive that.
It's funny to look at it in its proper context. I mean, it's not like festivals were new. I mean, it's not like they hadn't been done before, as Woodstock and Live Aid. But this is a touring festival, which at the time was largely uneven unheard of. And like you said, again, in context, you and I, were in college at the same time, listening to the same kind of music. And Lollapalooza was going to focus on alternative music, which was mostly relegated only to record stores and college radio stations, and largely dismissed commercially everywhere else. So it seemed like a pretty ballsy, risky move to put something like this together.
Well, it's interesting. You just reminded me. So we both were DJs at WMUR 750 AM, the strongest carrier current insular campus radio station on the planet. But I played the live Like a Suicide Guns N' Roses album on WMUR, and I played the live Jane's Addiction album on WMUR. So in many ways, for us to be able to share to the three people that were listening to us at the time these finds that we had, it kind of again just made this indelible mark that somehow created an enthusiasm, a passion, and a commitment to then share that with whoever you could. And so to me, going from a DJ to a college rep for Capitol Records in Milwaukee, hanging up posters and doing listening parties for Duran Duran, the Cocteau Twins, and New Model Army was awesome. But then getting into concert booking, it's like, okay, now I can do more than just play songs to the three people listening to our radio station. I can book these concerts and not only do it for the school, but for the community. So in many ways, I, from the beginning, was on the front line of what it was to be a fan of, quote, alternative music. And so to me, it wasn't just the music itself. It was, as I mentioned earlier, the community of people that we were a part of and the enthusiasm that we shared with each other. But more importantly, it was tremendous enthusiasm and tremendous communal celebration at concerts that we experienced together. So to then move to Los Angeles from Milwaukee and kind of take this authenticity that you can only acquire from the Midwest, I believe that.
Yeah.
And arrive in Los Angeles with optimism and most importantly, a lack of cynicism. I felt like I was an alien being among people who maybe weren't as authentic and maybe were cynical. But I've remained consistent in the fact that I am not a cynical person. I'm an enthusiastic person. And some people might take issue with that, but I leaned into it hard, which then led to this opportunity at Lollapalooza.
So I remember very vividly, having conversations with people that we both had in common about the kind of bookings you were doing in college. I mean, when I think of the bands that you were exposing people to, bands that we were playing on that radio station where four people were listening at a time. I mean, you were doing something that was absolutely remarkable. Nobody was booking bands like this. I mean, you booked the Goo Goo Dolls before anyone ever heard of them. You had booked Nirvana at one point. I mean, big shows. Bands that would wind up becoming some of the biggest bands in the world showed an enormous amount of foresight on your part. I mean, obviously, there's no way to predict who's going to be successful, who's not going to be successful, but to be that much ahead of the curve is a God-given gift. You were
You got to bring
doing
the Catholic school thing into it, don't you?
well. I mean, I had to tease you with it a little bit. You could
Well,
take
listen, I think that to have a passion leads to opportunities. So as a fan, going to record stores, going to concerts, hanging around like-minded people, I was never a musician. I thought I was going to be a writer. I'm not a creative person that pulls from the abstract. I'm a person where if there are variables, I will posit equations. I
Mhm.
will present something where this is how I see things fit, and sometimes it's a tight fit, but in my mind, it's someone has to do that. Someone has to come up with the different equations, right? So Perry Farrell, missing the Reading Festival and hearing about how amazing it was and being alongside people who had the foresight with him to put together a festival means that, he leaned into something that ultimately was singular to his miraculous mind. And I joked earlier that we got to see about 12 different Perry Farrells in the documentary. But this is a person who is open and available and guided by his heart, his spirit, and his artistry. So to put that first festival together, and I was at the first Lollapalooza, July 18th, 1991. That's my birthday. So
Mm.
I turned 23 that day, and I was at the show where Nine Inch Nails' equipment melted, and there's at one point my guess was it was 109 degrees. I stand by that. But to not only watch that bill come together and culminate in the farewell for Jane's Addiction, well, farewell at the time, because we just talked about them announcing their tour with Love and Rockets coming up. It wasn't just what was coming off the stage, it was who was in the audience. And so, as a fan and as someone who's not an artist, what I pay most attention to is who's alongside me. So, in college, to book these shows where I can have Red Lorry, Yellow Lorry one week, the Blake Babies the next week, and Soul Asylum and the Flaming Lips, and Peter Murphy and Nine Inch Nails in the movie theater at school, I was able to watch the spark ignite among my peers and be a part of that in a way where what can I do with this? How can I take this and do more? Because whether it's God given or just I needed to escape life and find this music thing, I just learned pretty quickly that it was fairly easy to find a way to take being a fan and make it professional, to become an actual professional fan. And so in college, doing all the different things that I did gave me not only the experience, but the confidence to gamble and try, which is why I ended up going to Los Angeles. So to me, it was always fueled by in an audience around people understanding that this is working, that this is resonating, that this is connecting. So to then think about that when I started booking Lollapalooza, it was 100% being at the Unicorn in Milwaukee with other people, or being at the Cabaret Metro in Chicago with other people.
Right.
And in Los Angeles, being at Raji's or any of these other small venues that I would go to, Jabberjaw and such. But I think that, I always think about kind of marinade. Like we all are in a form of a marinade. And the thing that sticks to us from that marinade, we can't ever shake. And so to me, I can't shake what it is to be in an audience with people caring about something. And so that brought me straight to the head of the line, straight to the front line of what it was to be someone who understood the power of alternative music in the late 80s and the early 90s.
When you first heard the idea that Lollapalooza was going to be even a thing, and they talk to you about a touring festival of this kind of music. I can only imagine what was in your head at the time that this is being explained to you about what this could be and what this could grow into. What was your initial thought about that?
I mean, my thought was that mixing genres together and putting a package together and then presenting it to people was inevitable. Because at the time, we had MTV, 120 Minutes. There was that show Night Flight, which,
Hmm.
oh my gosh, so many great things on that show. We had Tower Records, we had Rolling Stone. We all thought we were dialed in, but we weren't. So especially in markets not Los Angeles and not Chicago and not New York, it's like, okay, if I'm a person who wants to be a part of what's happening, I think I am because I'm getting content and I'm being exposed to things through all the things that I just said. But there was already inherently a commercial aspect to that. There was already inherently a curation done by corporations and businesses for that. What I was exposed to and what you were exposed to was we were curating for ourselves. We were finding our own thing. Like I could unapologetically listen to Einstürzen and Neubauten and then Debbie Gibson and not care what anyone thought about that because someone wasn't going to post a video of me watching Debbie Gibson videos on YouTube. Like that's not a thing. So I didn't have to apologize to anyone for anything that I was doing because there was no record of it, right? There was no, like, okay, that's fine, your word against mine. But instead of apologizing for listening to Debbie Gibson, I would then listen to Madonna and then I would listen to whoever else was uncool
Yeah.
in the minds of cool people. And that's the other thing. Like I mentioned I booked the Flaming Lips in college and then I ended up staying friends with them. I ended up bringing them into the talent agency that started booking them and just remained alongside them. There was a guitar player who joined the band after I had first met them named Ronald Jones. We talked a lot about the power of the subconscious mind. He was telling me about how he was doing Rolfing and just a really interesting person. But he was very mindful of the fact that there was a lot of things happening around the Flaming Lips. And like I went with them to the taping of 90210 and saw them play at the Peach Pit. And so, you have this like really wacko band who, when I booked them in 1994 at Lollapalooza, had the She Don't Use Jelly song that was becoming a hit then. And a lot of cool people were saying cool things about this cool band. And the guitar player, Ronald, said to me, you know what, dude, you can't be cool if nobody cares. So if there is a thing by, you know, if you're too self-aware of what cool is, then that's what you're in the pursuit of. And I'm much rather be in the pursuit of authenticity and be around people that have that. And if that's cool, great. But if not, I would just rather be hashtag me than hashtag cool.
I can totally see that, and I can also see how that might apply to the questions later on about, are we selling out? Are we being authentic to the original idea of Lollapalooza? And we'll get into that in a little bit. I think one of the things that you mentioned was the mixing of genres, and I think it's really important because it started from the very beginning, where in '91 you've got Henry Rollins, you got Nine Inch Nails, but then you also have Living Color and Body Count, which to me is a really crucial part of this because it shows a certain inclusion that I think was completely appropriate. And even though it may seem counterintuitive, I mean, you and I remember this, that in the late '80s, early '90s, there was this overlap of alternative music and hip hop starting to really kind of meld together. So to bring those kinds of artists into this, I thought, man, what a smart idea that was, and what it would become to, because I mean, there's a part where Ice T is talking to Ice Cube about what a really cool thing this would be for him to do, and then all of a sudden, you got George Clinton and other artists that might not be seen as in this blanket, but it was a totally appropriate decision. Tell me about that because I just think that was such a
Or
key
even
point.
like, me booking the Roots in 1995. Questlove wasn't Questlove then, right? So I was thinking also, like I saw Living Color and Jane's Addiction play at UW Milwaukee when I was there. And just I think again, and we've mentioned Bad Brains before, and I just think the community of punk rock spawned commercial alternative rock. But as fans, we didn't really think about it in terms of, well, boundaries, right?
Right.
Like I remember seeing New Order in Milwaukee, and the after party was at a gay club in Milwaukee. And I didn't think twice about where I went, who I was with, or what was going on. I was like, everything was, and anything was everything to me at the time. And I never thought about, I shouldn't go there, or I shouldn't listen to this, or I shouldn't be a part of this, because we were in a community together. And I mentioned the subculture a lot in the documentary because I truly felt like I was a part of the subculture.
Yeah.
So when you're sub something, there is no division, there is no acknowledgement of that's something other. It's I'm acknowledging that as something I'm a part of. So moving to Los Angeles, I was exposed to Fishbone, playing with No Doubt, playing with Rage Against the Machine, playing with Tool, playing with Guar, playing with, like, the mix of music that I was exposed to made it the same thing, right? And then at the time, I would see Guns N' Roses or LA Guns or Faster Pussycat. I would see 45 Grave. I would see Christian Death. So in anything in between. And so to me, the idea that Lollapalooza was preposterous in putting these genres together didn't even occur to me. What
Yeah.
occurred to me, why didn't this happen before? Oh, it did in England in the Reading Festival. And I loved going to the Reading Festival. And I loved at the Reading Festival going to the comedy tent and seeing Eddie Izzard perform in drag in the early 90s. And I remember walking in and among that same audience and that same crowd. It just happened to be a lot bigger and a lot more enthusiastic. I mean, I think if you remember in the late 80s, we would watch all these videos of performances in the UK,
Right.
and people are waving their arms and people are standing on their shoulders, and there's all this unapologetic enthusiasm and an unbridled fandom that we didn't have an opportunity to experience here because it wasn't as culturally significant. Because you at the time had the NME, you had the Melody Maker, you had baked into the UK avenues to the subculture, avenues to this type of music and these types of artists. And so us being here in the States, buying import CDs and scouring the racks at the record stores for the next Slow Dive or My Bloody Valentine or Ride or whomever, that the wave of enthusiasm, we just rode that here. And so Perry literally being not at the Reading Festival, but adjacent to it. And for those that haven't seen the doc, you should, because you'll see what I'm talking about. There is just something compelling about being open to things that are happening and leaning into it. That's what I did when I moved here.
So I've talked to Angela Moore a couple times. I talked to Walter Kibbe, both from Fishbone. And one of the things that is true about a band like that, and they were just so preposterously great that both radio and record companies didn't know what to do with a band like that. And they had a hard time marketing them. And as a result, they wound up dropping them, and they never really fulfilled the promise that I think, a band like that really had or really deserved. And it's interesting to me how that exact opposite approach was taken in Lollapalooza. It didn't matter that these were black artists and playing rock music or hip hop or whatever it may have been, but that the lines were completely wiped away in Lollapalooza, which I think that's one of the reasons why, as I'm watching the documentary, I'm going, well, that makes perfect sense, and good for them for not riding on that same level of division that you would see like in the corporate part of music.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that when I got approached to help expand the festival beyond just the one stage, in 1992, there was basically milk crates and plywood was set up in a field and bands would show up and play. And you saw from the doc, Tool played that year, Rage played that year. I suggested some bands that played that year, but it wasn't in the ad mat, it wasn't marketed, it wasn't publicized. It was just kind of an off the cuff happening during the festival. There was this stage that was going on. But in 1993, it was the end of 1992, I got approached by Ted Gardner, who I'm so happy has his moment in this documentary. If I have one mentor in my life, it's Ted Gardner. And he was a person who, he was a tour manager for Frank Zappa and Echo and the Bunnymen and Men at Work, and was just the most gregarious person you would meet, who really identified talent, vulnerability, and I guess weakness in people like me,
Mm.
and wanted to be a strength for us, and wanted to boost us up and hoist us into a position where he saw something in us that we had trouble seeing in ourselves. So Ted was a person who said, I see you day in and day out sitting in this cubicle. You're the most enthusiastic person. You're at every show. You're engaged with everyone that comes through. Why don't we have you come in and have you be a part of an additional stage? And I had met Perry a bunch of times before then, and I understood that he was someone who was unconventional, kind of all over the place in the best kind of free-spirited way. And we sat down, myself, Perry, and Ted, and they're like, "We want to give you a stage. Go for it." And so it was kind of daunting because, how do I live up to putting together, Lush alongside Ministry? Like, how do you do that? And I think the way that I did it was I just started thinking about the peers at the clubs that I met growing up, and the folks that came to the shows at Marquette. And ultimately, I was like, okay, well, if I was a DJ and I was throwing a party, who would I put on? And so at those early days of being in the office at Lollapalooza, I went from literally just a desk and a chair and a phone to hanging up some posters to bringing in some music to listen to. I had this boom box that was my friend for all the years that I did it. And I just kind of wanted to find things that people knew about, find things that I wished people knew about, and then things that also challenged me.
Mm.
So I was really putting myself in the audience, thinking about if I was there among my peers and I was DJing to us, what would be entertaining to us, what would be interesting to us, what would be groundbreaking to us, and what could potentially be our favorite artists. So the fact that Perry turned the reins over to me in 1992, I was 24 at the time, meant that I was giving permission to be able to do this for myself and my friends,
Mm.
and then friends of friends and people that would be friends. So I had absolutely no agenda other than I'm here to serve Perry Farrell. Ted Gardner kept everyone away to enable me to do my thing. I had regular meetings with Perry where I would share music with him. And I literally inhabited him for the 3 years that I did it. And so talking about him the way that I did in the documentary was very heartfelt. It
Yeah.
was very recognizing of the fact that not only did he enlist me, he trusted me, he turned the reins over to me and supported me the entire time. And I mean, to be able to be that self-aware, that confident, and that gracious to let a kid do things for kids, I can't think of a greater gift than that.
Yeah.
I think say that. I think I even say that in the documentary. But man, meeting Perry Farrell was a gift, dude. And he's a strange dude. He's a authentic dude. I keep using the word authenticity, but that's what I was drawn to. And so I'm gonna keep using that word. And I just remember people would say things about him like, that's him. That's him all the time.
Yeah.
That is his heart, that is his soul, that is his brain, that is his mind, and that is his art.
It's really interesting to watch him operate in telling this story and his thoughts about everything. The fact that he's given a 24-year-old kid this much autonomy and really saying, let's see how you do, and I'm loving what you're accomplishing. I don't know how you how you stop fanboying the hell out of the guy. I mean, you and I kind of grew up on Jane's Addiction, and to this day, Nothing Shocking is one of the greatest rock albums ever recorded. there's a conversation in this thing about the importance of Jane's addiction and what that meant. And then here you are talking to this guy, and he is literally just handing you the keys to something special. Knowing you the way I do, I know that sincerity is like maybe one of your biggest attributes. And there's no one more sincere than a John Rubeli. But then to have that kind of trust in you, I mean, really is something very special. And obviously you very sincerely explain that, and just now, but also in the documentary. It does sound like it was a tremendous gift.
Um, yeah, and I think that one of the things that we lack now is just a natural ability to just want to help and support people. Like and I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm not saying people aren't in that headspace these days. But what I'm saying is that we have to go through so many optics to get to the rawness of a personal connection, the rawness of what it is to be with other people, understand other people, and honestly be self-aware enough to learn, be vulnerable, be wrong, to grow and ultimately thrive from the engagements we have with other people. It's analog versus digital. It's in real life versus being virtual. There is something unique to being in person with people. There is something unique to seeing a live concert. There is something unique to bumping into someone in a bookstore or a record store. Like life and the happenstance that occurs, I don't necessarily get nostalgic. I think I just think about things. That's my history. That's my experience. But what I do miss, though, is the randomness that we had when we didn't have GPS.
Hmm.
Like I loved life when I didn't have GPS. Like I want to get lost. I want to make a wrong turn, right?
Right.
And so Lollapalooza in many ways was you showed up and there was no GPS. So you could go from the main stage to the second stage. You could go to the poet stage that we had. You could try a falafel, you could try a smart drink, you could get lost. And I think that the festival atmosphere is something where we embraced getting lost.
Hmm.
And for those of us that were putting it together, we wanted you to get lost. And we knew where you would end up. And we knew you could stumble into seeing the Roots and be like, what is this? Who are these dudes? Or the Far Side. And then, again, I'm mentioning acts that weren't Mercury Rev or Stereolab or the Verve. Like but even you're talking about British bands, you're talking about musically esoteric bands. And so to mix these things together and to, in the case of the years I did it, have Nick Cave show up with the Flaming Lips and sing What a Wonderful World. Or in select markets, all of a sudden, Green Day's playing unannounced on the second stage, or the Smashing Pumpkins are playing unannounced on the second stage, or Cypress Hill, or the Black Crowes, or Patti Smith, or Moby. I think that the getting lost part of life is being found again. I
Yeah.
think a lot of us are okay being lost, but we're also encouraging other people to get lost. We're also encouraging other people to experiment and take risks and be okay with being hashtag yourself. You don't have to choose a thing to hashtag other than yourself.
It's interesting to hear you talk about the idea of getting lost, because even within the organization, as Lollapalooza goes on for a couple of years, there seems to be a point where there's a lot of discussion about, are we selling out? Are we losing our way? Is the mission of Lollapalooza getting obscured in some way? There's a whole discussion about, for example, booking Metallica on the main stage, and that seemed to be somewhat of a divisive decision about whether or not to include them. I know you were a part of those discussions. Ultimately, a Metallica played, and ultimately bands that may have seemed to have had a lot of commercial success did get involved. Tell me about what those discussions were, and how intense those things got.
Well, it's interesting because I wasn't there the year Metallica did it, and I talk in the documentary about they went from Sonic Youth headlining one year to Metallica the next, and where is the bridge between the two? So I have to back up a little bit, and I'll tell you, when I started booking in 1993, there was already the discussions of this is a big corporate rock festival. So there was a handful of acts from the alternative community that early on kind of paved the way for me to be able to include the types of credible and alternative acts that I knew would kind of give the right context and perspective for a second stage alongside a main stage. So early on, I met Jenny Toomey and Kristen Thompson, who have a label called Simple Machines at the time. They were in a band called Tsunami, and they were one of the first acts that I booked. They published a book on how to tour, how to put out your own records. They were from the East Coast. They were a part of the Teen Beat Discord scene, and they were smart and were curious, but they kept my feet to the fire. They really challenged what it was to be engaging a big corporate rock festival
Mm.
with people who were very DIY at the time. And so when you mention my sincerity, again, I'm just a fan. Like if you're doing something awesome, I want to be in the front row cheering. So to engage them was helpful to me. There was a guy, Lyle Hyson, who was in the band Das Damen, who was managing a band called Cell that Sonic Youth had signed to DGC at the same time they signed Nirvana and St. Johnny to DGC. And Lyle put me in touch with everyone. And he put me in touch with, at the time, Steve Shelley, the drummer of Sonic Youth, and Kim Gordon and Thurston Moore from Sonic Youth, all of which played in side projects on my stage in 1993. So you had this hall of, this is a big corporate rock festival, but it's alternative music, and it's the people that are coming are fans of alternative, and people in Des Moines or Cincinnati or wherever, they didn't think about it as being a sellout or commercial. They thought about it as, oh my God, I get to drive less than 2 hours to see a dozen of my favorite acts at the time. So if I didn't have the support of the Jenny Christens and Lyles of the world, I wouldn't have had the access or the opportunity to put these acts on a stage to kind of give credibility to this thing that was becoming corporate, this thing that was becoming successful. But I would sort of posit that it was more successful than it was corporate, but because of its success, it brought in the things that were corporate. So when 1994 came around, and I didn't have to basically convince people to do this, I had every person calling, basically threatening me to book a band. Otherwise, I wouldn't have a career in the music industry. I love a part in the documentary where the agent Don Muller, who booked Pearl Jam and Nirvana and Soundgarden, he's like, people were making demands on me, and I was like, no. So I had people starting to make demands on me, and it was uncomfortable. I'm pretty conflict averse, and in the realm of making choices that I felt I was insulated from those pressures because of Ted, because of Perry. All of a sudden, they were breaking through,
Mm.
and it made me extremely uncomfortable that I had to engage in executive warfare. I wasn't equipped for executive warfare when I was 25. I was equipped for, these things are awesome and these things deserve to be adjacent to a larger stage. But just because you signed a band that sounds like Nirvana doesn't mean that the band Paw deserves to be on the second stage, even though I like that band. Or there was a band called Sky Cries Mary, who had a manager at the time from the same management firm that managed Nirvana. It was like, you have to put this band on. I was like, I'm 100% certain that at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a gothy shrouded in black band is not going to work. And at the same time, we already have acts like that are represented on the main stage, but there's also a context in which I know how things work there because I actually was there for every single show. I was in the audience for every single show. So what then happens is, and again, I say this too in the thing, that 1994 to me was the peak. That was the year Nirvana was supposed to do it, and instead the Beastie Boys and Smashing Pumpkins headline. And it was truly Lollapalooza hanging on to the last possible moment of presenting things in a way where Lollapalooza was in the driver's seat. Lollapalooza was saying, this is what alternative is to us. This is what subversive programming to the subculture is. And no matter what, we're going to believe in this, we're going to lean into this, and we're going to present it. So that summer, I remember we played 4 shows in Detroit. There was 50,000 people per show. 200,000 people in one summer in Detroit came to see Lollapalooza. And so what ends up happening is it's successful. I mentioned how my mom got alternative press at the supermarket to read about me in alternative press. MTV's interviewing me. I'm like, what do that was weird. But so you kind of have this peak of like all of this stuff is bubbling up. And then what happens? The internet. Then
Yeah.
what happens? All of a sudden, the record store clerk becomes obsolete. The music critic becomes obsolete. The ability to get lost changes because the internet is like, oh, I found you. When 1995 came around, there was an organizational shift within Lollapalooza. Someone who was there at the beginning was not there during 1993 and 1994, though you wouldn't know that watching the documentary. But this person comes back and Perry is kind of re-engaged, and all of a sudden it's like, we're going to apologize for being commercial. We're going to apologize for being corporate. We're going to have Sonic Youth headline. And I'm like, you guys are out of your minds. You should get a band that is going to make those kids in the middle of the country come to the festival so that I can get them to see Royal Trucks, so I can get them to see the Palace Brothers, so I can get them to see the Roots, right? Like, so in my mind, it was like, I tell the story about how Jesus Lizard's playing on the main stage and I book Coolio on the second stage. Okay, well, I didn't do that to throw this in your face. I did this because I knew what people wanted to see. I knew that what people would react to. So by having Sonic Youth headline Lollapalooza meant you weren't going to have people that were fans of Stone Temple Pilots or Bush or Live. Those are bands that I talk about not being cool. The thing is, that's where the whole you can't be cool if no one cares comes in. Because as great as Sonic Youth is, and as awesome as it was to, in theory, have them headline, what it also meant was a lot less people were going to come. What it meant was a lot less people were familiar with this thing that you were putting together, because at the time you couldn't just put up a ticket like Coachella and expect it to sell.
Yeah.
Lollapalooza, you announced the bill, you presented to people in advance the thing that they were meant to spend an entire day going to, and the proposition shifted. It changed. It became Lollapalooza apologizing for the success, apologizing for being as culturally relevant as it was. And in many ways, you had executives trying to impress other executives by doing things that were quote unquote cool, while completely disregarding the fans and the audience that were going to pay for the whole thing.
Well, there's a part that you and I had talked about last time we spoke. You talked about the whole Coolio Jesus Lizard situation. It's interesting to me that even though they made that decision to have Jesus Lizard on the main stage and you booked Coolio even before he started to have hits, it wasn't your fault that he just happened to blow up just before Lollapalooza, as if somehow this was your fault, as if you were somehow responsible for 80,000 people going to the parking lot and 20,000 people staying in the arena. I mean, it seemed like that's a misdirect and a projection of their frustration, realizing, well, maybe we didn't do it the right way.
Well, again, I have respect for everyone that I worked with, okay? But we all have our own perspective and our own experience and our own way of engaging in things. I was able to, for the better part of my time there, be the voice in the room of the folks that were in the audience. I didn't care about what other people thought about what I was doing. But the thing is, music critics write for other music critics. Executives do things to try to one-up each other. It's a different game that they're all in. The game that I was in was really simple. let's do something that's awesome together. And so it never occurred to me to put myself in front of or take myself out of the crowd. So I'm a voice of the crowd in a boardroom, trying to amplify that crowd in a way where, I'm telling you this is what we want. I'm telling you this is what will work. I'm telling you, don't apologize because half my high school class ditched the day to go to the thing. Like, celebrate that, right?
Right.
But then all of a sudden it's like you're saying, well, the football team can't come, and only the theater kids can come. And it's like, I was a theater kid, but there was a certain point where I remember graduating high school, and there was the division of the jocks and the punks and this and that. Like, I benefited from being consistently myself, which meant I didn't judge anyone for, if you liked Phil Collins, great, but listen to this Metallica CD that I have.
Right.
Or, if you want to tell me how awesome Bryan Adams is, I'll show you The Damned. So in a way, I never felt like I had to one up anyone. I never felt like I had to prove anything to anyone. I just wanted to share my perspective and my enthusiasm and my joy. And at the same time, and this is key, I just was open. Like, I like, if that's your thing, tell me why. If that's your thing, I'll go check it out with you. Like, there's a funny story I have where when I was in the agent training program, right around the time I was starting Lollapalooza, this is before I left, there was some dudes there that were big deadheads, and I was just, no, 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 no.
You and I share that
And
one.
and I was like, they're just like totally telling me how amazing they are. And I was like, well, you guys should check out Sonic Youth. And they're like, no. I'm like, no, no, check out Sonic Youth. And I'm like, okay, we'll make a deal with you. If we come to Sonic Youth, you need to come see the Grateful Dead. So I remember I'm watching the Sonic Youth at the Palladium, and Nirvana played that show. And I think it's the first time they played Smells Like Teen Spirit, if I remember correctly. So I'm watching, and then so they play, and I'm watching Sonic Youth, and then the dudes walk up, and I'm like, oh. So they saw Sonic Youth, and I had to go see the Grateful Dead at the Sam Boyd Arena in Las Vegas, and the Steve Miller Band open. It's the only time in my life I took mushrooms. I saw a double rainbow. They had to get me out of the bathroom because apparently you're not supposed to look at yourself in the mirror. But when I saw the Grateful Dead, I hated it so much, but I appreciated the audience. I appreciated the crowd. I appreciated that somehow all of these people came into this venue in the middle of the desert to see this concert. And so, as much as I hated and still hate and will never like the Grateful Dead, I appreciate the fact that what they did was their thing.
Yeah.
And I appreciated that people appreciated what they did. So in many ways, if I'm responsible, then fast forwarding to Lollapalooza, why would I not think about people that are different than me and the joy and enthusiasm that they would have? And as much as, I mean, I had a luxury in that I didn't really book anyone I didn't like, to be honest with you. Because I had the support and the freedom from Perry and Ted to do my thing. But at the same time, in 1993, I had to understand what Alice in Chains was to that crowd, what Primus was to that crowd. And so carrying that forward for my final year in 1995, from then until then, it was always about the audience. It was always about, how are we connecting, and is this thing working? In 1995, Lollapalooza decided to disconnect from an audience, and they didn't recover. They just didn't.
I want to kind of twist things around here a little bit, because with all of your experience in booking bands and with Lollapalooza and with, working with Atlantic Records and owning your own record companies, you have kind of a unique perspective on this. There's a part in the documentary where Lollapalooza gets some criticism about increasing the ticket price from like $25 to like $35. By today's standards, that's practically giving away a concert for free. With everything that's going on in the concert industry, now it's become so expensive to see the bands you want to see. And you have antitrust lawsuits that are going on between the ticket industry and the government. There's so much criticism about live performances now. And then it's the only way an artist gets to make money. They're certainly not going to make money, on streaming revenue. Where are we heading with this? I mean, do you see things changing for the better, or are things just going to get more and more difficult as time goes on?
I've always had a hard time asking for favors, so I buy my own tickets, and it's a frustrating process to buy tickets. I sign up to every email list. I'm on every music site there is, Reddit stuff, that when tickets are going on sale. Like, I really wanted to see Andre 3000 do his flute thing here. It was at a venue called Hollywood Forever, which is part of a cemetery here, and I couldn't get tickets. I go on right at the time they say to get tickets. I log in at 9:59, and by 10 o'clock they're all gone. And it's frustrating to me because I really want to see that show. But then all of a sudden you're like, all these tickets are available on these scalping sites. And all of a sudden it's like, I'm a fan, I signed in, I'm playing along by your rules, but you're really not telling me what the rules are. You're really not telling me the whole thing.
Yeah.
Like, band Pulp is playing here. They're playing 3 shows here. One at the Hollywood Forever I mentioned, and 2 at the Palladium here. And I ended up getting tickets for all 3 because that's me. But but again, it was frustrating because you sign in and things are glitchy, and you wait, and your $30 ticket becomes $55. Or you're in that case, I think it was the $100 ticket that became 160 or something. To answer your question, the whole antitrust discussion that's happening is real. I think that we've allowed way too much consolidation to happen in every way, in every facet, whether it's a supermarket, a concert promoter, airlines, whatever it is. The thing about antitrust is it allows the entrepreneur to do something entrepreneurial. It allows for things to change and things to evolve and things to grow. So with regards to live music, it's going to have to start with people doing house concerts, to the smaller promoter working outside of Live Nation and working outside of the consolidated efforts that have made things expensive, that have made things, in my mind, kind of watered down. So I hope and I think that there is going to be a return to some form of subculture. It's not subculture anymore because with the internet, there's nothing sub anything. But maybe there's other avenues within the culture where people decide this is my thing, and it's fine that there's all this other stuff, but that has nothing to do with me. So the more people come together and do their own thing, their own way for each other, that's the way things change. I'm really fascinated by TikTok being the reason why shoegaze is having a renaissance at the moment. I'm friendly with the band Slow Dive, and I just saw 2 performances by them in suburbs of LA, I guess you can call it that. One in Pomona, one in Ventura, and the band Drab Majesty opened for them. They're incredible too. But you're at the concert and it's all Gen Z kids. It's all these young kids who are coming together celebrating a band that 30 years ago was discarded as an also ran, that wasn't authentic as a shoegaze band, that is doing 10 times better than Lush, 10 times better than Ride. And somehow they struck a chord with these kids, these young kids. And there's a contemporary band, Dive, that I really like, that is also kind of a shoegaze band. And so you have these kids through the most commercial vehicle, TikTok, finding something within it that is literally a definition of what the subculture was in the early 90s, who are coming together and going to these shows and selling out these shows and enabling a band who was dormant for decades to come back and reignite among young kids the thing that ignited all of us back then. So my hope is that within the young kids, they take the initiative to put on their own shows and support their own interests and really celebrate what it is to not have someone tell you what's cool and what's awesome, but for you and your friends to come together and really help define and trailblaze and lead the way for what is awesome. Because that's what people like me and the peers that I had at the time were able to do. You had young people becoming booking agents for their favorite bands. You had people like me at a festival. You had people starting and ultimately running big record companies doing the same thing. But what ends up happening is that if you're too many steps removed from the front line, and this is a good segue into Lollapalooza 1995, I'm literally the only person in the boardroom that was at every single show the last 2 years telling you you're making a mistake, telling you that from the front line, it's not what you think it is. I know what you want it to be. I know what you think would be cool for it to be. But what I'm telling you is we have to evolve and pay attention to what's going on around us. And for those of us that are in a position to do something about it, we have a responsibility to amplify things that are happening rather than imposing our will over the things that are happening. Because at a certain point, we talked a little bit about me signing the band POD. When I became an A&R person, I would have loved to have signed the next My Bloody Valentine or the next Sonic Youth or the next Fall or the next Killing Joke. I was about to turn 30, and it's like, okay, that's not me anymore. This isn't who I'm shoulder to shoulder with in the audience anymore. Because my shoulders are 30 and slouchy. The upright, enthusiastic, and authentic audience members liked POD. They liked what was about to become new metal in the early 2000s. What was whether it was them or Korn or the Deftones or System of a Down. I mean, to me, that was their Sonic Youth and My Bloody Valentine. That was the thing that they stood shoulder to shoulder and liked at the time. And so for me to kind of recognize that and really truly get over myself and understand this isn't about me. And so booking those shows at Marquette, that wasn't about me. Booking Lollapalooza wasn't about me. And you know what? Signing acts to Atlantic wasn't about me. It took me turning 50 to start a record label that I actually felt, okay, can be about me. Because that's what it is right now.
Right.
Because to me, the label that I have, it's a passion project, right? Like you're not making money being a record label. You just aren't right now. So the thing that troubles me right now is the acts on my label. How are they making a living? How are they continuing to grow as artists? And what is their future? And it can't just be licensing songs for film and television and commercials, because those fees, you've dropped to zero on those fees now because of how much content is out there. And because that is really one of the only financial games going, people say yes to the $5,000 instead of $50,000. But if you get a song in a TV show and you get $5,000, okay, let's divide that up among band members, among lawyers, among the label, and in the end, how do you make a living? So the answer to your question, and the thing I struggle with as a label, is how do we get back to a sustainable touring business? How do we get back to a sustainable fan to fan, band to fan, city to city endeavor that enables these artists to come home with money to pay rent and turn around and record new songs and release new songs? And I think that the more that kids understand that, buy that t-shirt, buy that record,
Yeah.
go see your band play, buy the concert ticket, and hopefully it's at a venue that's small enough and intimate enough, put on by a promoter that's smart enough to understand that if you don't build this next generation of music fans live, you're going to lose them.
I'm very much a believer that that everything is connected to everything, and that if you really wanted to recreate the subculture and recreate an economy that makes the sense of music, you'd have to put money in their hands, not take it away from with service fees and $200, $300,000 tickets. I mean, the reason why Spotify and Apple Music makes sense is because I don't have to pay much for it, as opposed to I can buy a record, I could buy a CD, I could buy something else that helps the artist. I think if you take money away from the consumer, you're taking money away ultimately from the artist, and I don't think you can have it both ways so that everybody gets satisfied and everyone can survive on it.
100%. I think the other thing that we're missing now is what it is to grow up alongside music ephemera.
Mm.
Like you and I grew up with records and posters and cassettes and concert t-shirts and all that kind of stuff. So when iTunes started, you and I could build a library and we could take songs and drag them to our phone. We could take it with us. Our phone became the iPod. And dude, I don't know how to take a song from my computer and put it on my phone to where I can listen to it. I can't make my own library of music on my phone. I can't curate for me what it is that I want to listen to. I can make a playlist on Spotify and download it, but there are so many songs not on Spotify that I want to listen to.
Right.
I want to have my own music library. I want to put together something that is me, that I can then refer to, listen to, go back to, share, do whatever it is with that. So in many ways, you have kids that don't understand what it's like to have your own collection of things, to put together your own, in my case, identity through my things. In many ways, my identity was attached to my record collection, my t-shirt collection, my cassette collection that I made myself of mixtapes. So I think that we've done things where you've taken the analog nature of piecing something together on your own and making it this digital thing that's AI and algorithms are doing for you.
Yeah.
It's like, I want to be my own AI. I want to be my own algorithm. But Apple doesn't let me do that anymore. And it really bothers me. It really bothers me that music that I own, music that I want to own, things that I possess, I can't put it together in a way that allows my phone to play it for me, where I used to drag and drop playlists. Now I can't do any of that stuff. And so again, I think that I was thinking also a lot about, there's a lot going on in the world right now. I remember at Marquette, I was a member of the Progressive Students Organization. I remember silk screening Free South Africa t-shirts, alongside music. A lot of us had activism and causal things. So to see what's happening on college campuses now, regardless of what side you're on, you're seeing an activation of people asserting their identity, people asserting their passion, people asserting accountability. So maybe that's the thing. Maybe Congress enacting antitrust laws to break up monotonies of providing accountability for Ticketmaster, maybe doing the same thing for concert promoters, maybe doing the same thing for media conglomerates. Like if you're not holding people accountable for removing the things that enable us to be unique, authentic, and ourselves, then it's never going to change. So in a lot of ways, a Lollapalooza festival kind of put forth a model of Perry saying, this is my vision. I'm an artist. I'm a part of a community. I envision this being in the world. And Perry really believes in love and manifesting and bringing everyone together and being creative and, dancing drunk on wine for 48 hours and hugging everyone. Like, that's his vision. That's his authenticity. That's his accountability to himself, in that this is too powerful for me not to do something about. So my hope is that we have kids that recognize their individual authentic, unique selves and realize I have a responsibility to do something with this. Because I feel like we've gone too long where people haven't been responsible
Yeah.
with what it is to be unique.
John, I appreciate you taking some time today. It's always great to catch up with you. Again, if anyone has not seen the documentary, you need to see the documentary. It is just that good. And John, you certainly play a major role in it. And this has been really interesting today. So I appreciate it.
Well, and I appreciate the fact that you have this podcast and that so many of my heroes and idols have shared their experience, their authenticity, and the fact that you're compelled to do this is exactly the thing that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Like more people should be doing this, Bax, and the fact that you're doing it is really instructive for more people to follow the thing that they're passionate about. I really respect your passion and your enthusiasm. I don't know, it keeps me sane, dude.
Well, I appreciate that, John. That means a lot. The name of the new documentary series featuring John Rubeli is called Lala, The History of Lollapalooza. It's available to stream on Paramount Plus, and it is really, really good. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, like it, share it, rate it, subscribe to it. Be sure to follow the show on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. You can also email me at bax@rock102.com. I'd love to hear what you think. Thanks to Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram of Chicopee for their support, and thanks to you for listening to Baxy's Musical Podcast.